This is the Story of Godcast with Trip Fuller and Barry Taylor. It's a podcast about the story of God, among other things.
Where from? You sexy thing, you. I believe in miracles. Since you came along.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get miraculous.
It's always a miracle being with you.
Oh, it is always a miracle. I can't believe that that this journey's ending.
I know, I can't believe it. It's a miracle.
Speaking of journeys,
Yes.
and things ending, it reminds me, life is a journey filled with potholes.
Yeah. It's a country song and a Taoist theory.
It is, but that's in the middle of this episode. But
Yeah.
before Jesus, my voice is doing weird things.
It's very Barry White-like today, Trip.
Hello. Anyway, before we jump in to this,
Should we pitch the prayer hankies and the healing oils that we've got and water from the Ganges?
what you mean, the brackish water?
The brackish water, yeah. The brackish water.
So interesting enough, since the last time we recorded an episode, we had a number of odd comments about this show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one Facebook post said, "I have not watched the show, but I think I might get around to it because it's entertaining." Another person went on iTunes and gave us a very low review and said, "I don't think that they enjoy the show."
Really?
And so I thought I would just clarify that
I love the show.
that the joking about something is a sign of endearment
Absolutely.
for emotionally immature people.
Exactly.
And so the other part, I did find someone on Twitter discussing it, but without tagging us.
That's rude.
I know. I told them.
Oh, you did? Good.
Yeah.
Well done.
And he said that I should shut up more.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And just let you talk. And I was like,
That's not going to happen.
I was like, whoa, dude. Look.
Yeah, settle down.
I was like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, really. Come on.
And like, I'm mostly just vamp so that you can come up with cool stuff to say.
That's right. And I need time.
Things take time. The other thing is, before we even start talking about miracles, I do have a miracle to perform.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What is that miracle, Trip?
That Morgan Freeman's actually about to talk on this podcast.
I know. That in and of itself is the miracle of all miracles.
So before we get miraculous, before we go to the Vatican,
Yeah.
or the Passover,
Yeah.
before we go to Chinatown,
Yeah. Chinatown. Why go to China when you can go to Chinatown?
before we discuss this episode
Before we go back to Egypt.
and India, an episode where Qatar is not involved
Right.
because
He got cutted.
he got cuttered. Here we go. We're going to talk to Morgan Freeman and Lori. They're the other two producers
Right.
of the Story of God with Morgan Freeman.
Right.
Because we already talked to the other. He's all British, and you were all
Yeah,
going on and on about soccer.
Yeah. Quite rightly, too.
Luckily, we do not talk about soccer.
Speaking of miracles, Leicester City Football Club winning the Premier League this year. Some say that's miraculous. Others would say it's sheer hard work and focus, but who am I to argue?
I don't
On
know.
a show about miracles.
Well, why Morgan says stuff, you should flip a coin about it.
All right. And then we could actually calculate the probability
Correct.
and determine whether it's fate, destiny, miraculous, or just the randomness of existence.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then. Go on then, Morgan. Get
Tell
on
us
with it.
something.
One of the coolest parts of having done the companion podcast and stuff with it is hearing back from ministers of all sorts of different religious traditions, and from more conservative to progressive ones. And they've had such a beautiful response for the conversations it's provoked in their faith communities. So I'm interested in how this type of opening for more generative conversations feels as people putting on this really powerful series.
I'm happy that there's any conversation going on about God or religion or people's individual faiths. I think traditionally in America we've steered away from politics and religion, and I think that because religion permeates so much of our national and international news that it's more important than ever that we have these conversations.
Well, and one of the things that I think pops out in the series so well is how what culture, time, and situation we're born in, be it Morgan sharing his story to people all across the globe. In one sense, that's accidental, but then the depths of each tradition is a place we discover grace and gratitude and this type of thing. What has been kind of the rediscoveries of your own story and tradition that have lit up as you've encountered so many others in the process?
Bottom line, Trip, is that going into this series, you are open to whatever is you're going to encounter. What happened with me was not any change in the way I look at life or that I think of God. This whole thing has been a trip, a voyage of enlightenment. I've just learned an awful lot about how different cultures have approached the question of God. It has not really affected me, and I think that's probably for the best, because if any of them had, I would probably not have come back.
One of the parts in it where your face just lights up, and you mentioned this before I ever got to see the show, is the encounter with the Zoroastrians and the good thoughts, good deeds, good words part. And they actually demonstrate the ability for a religion to evolve, right, from this violent apocalyptic kind of birth to this turning it inward spiritual journey. What's it like to encounter religions that do embrace the evolution and change of their faith?
Well, I did brighten up. I did, because of the realization that, if I'm going to embrace anything, this has to be it, because it's simple.
Mm-hmm.
Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It's what I think it's what the bulk of humanity indulges in. I think it's why we're all still here instead of having somehow managed to annihilate each other.
Well, I support avoiding annihilation. I'm interested about your intuitions around the changing shape of religion and culture. In a number of the studies, there's the rise of people who identify themselves as none. But if you look at the details, the number of people in the United States that will respond saying they've had powerful mystical encounters has gone up 30%. At the same time, identity with the religion's gone down. How has your encounter with different people and traditions? Do you have a way of understanding these type of changes?
No, not I. Not quite understanding all of these changes. No. That's the best answer I have.
Well, how would you describe the difference or relationship of religion and spirituality?
I don't know if there is that much of a separation between the two. Most of the people who say they are spiritual are hardwired to some religion. Most.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are others who consider themselves spiritual, but not religious. In other words, they don't have a quote-unquote religious affiliation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, did you say something, Lori?
No, I was just going to say, I think that many people that I know that describe themselves as spiritual and not religious have made a concerted effort to divorce themselves from the dogma that seems to have been stuck maybe in another time to them. And And although most of the tenets of the religion, the rest of the tenets of the religion they subscribe to, they try to pull themselves away from the things that have them feel uncomfortable by having to take everything or nothing. And so they become something where they call themselves spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is short. We got time for one more.
Okay. One of the things that I saw running throughout the series is this curious and kind of joyful relationship of East and West, religion, science, spirituality, and religion, that the things that so often kind of get paired against each other. Can you describe the type of spiritual curiosity that leads one to ask the questions that break down so many binaries that people tend to live with?
I had a breakthrough in understanding, but that came from the Catholic Church. That came from Catholicism, in that they very successfully have married religion and science, apparently, because they answered the question of creation both ways, scientifically and religiously and biblically. That the two do not eliminate each other's being.
Yeah.
In other words, the Big Bang Theory and evolution do not eliminate the reality of God. Mm-hmm. Because God had to be before the Big Bang, and the evolution has to be sanctioned by God. Mm-hmm. I found that very fascinating, very interesting.
And I hope the Pope gets you to stay around just for PR purposes, because when you find out they've thought that for hundreds of years, you wonder who their PR agent is.
Exactly. Seriously, right?
Yeah. I don't think you were the only one shocked.
Yeah.
All right. Good to talk to you, Lori.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Oh, miracles. So what even pops in your head the moment you hear miracles? I mean, I understand why it's one of the 6 episodes about God.
It kind of makes my mouth a little dry, actually.
Yes.
Because it's such a contested arena of widely diverse and polemical opinions.
Yes.
And yes, it's actually an integral part, I think, of the story of God wherever you might find yourself. But it's obviously in our day and age something that raises lots of questions and sometimes even hackles for people.
Yeah, and I actually think this is my favorite episode's opening scene with the window washing brother.
Yeah. Because
they kind of like lure you in, like, don't you want to call it a miracle? And then you find out his brother died in the accident.
Yeah.
And I think that story shows just how contested the word miracle is.
Sure. Or how capricious the miraculous might be.
Yeah, and one of the things that runs through the episode is this connection of miracle, divine intervention. What do you call a miracle?
Yeah.
And my inner philosopher would just like to let it be known that most people, when they use the word miracle, mean what David Hume, the philosopher, means by miracle.
Which is, Tripp?
And his assumption, when he's defining miracles, is that the world and the divine, there's a giant gap between it.
Yep.
And a miracle would be an intervention by the divine that that changes what would have happened otherwise.
Right.
And it's important to see that, just because that's not a necessary way of understanding the God-world relationship. Because the Enlightenment, mechanistic determinism, the scientific method and such, you came to describe the world as if God was not involved or related to it unless you came in to break some natural law.
Sure.
And when you presume things that way and then you try to prove stuff by miracles under that definition, you have humans that are, of faith then wanting to say, David Hume's right about the definition. Now let me prove God by coming up with this type of event.
Yeah.
And I think that's just problematic, but almost as problematic as everything's a miracle.
Exactly.
Like those are the two things that just,
yeah.
so, I mean, I know like you get at them at different ways throughout the episode.
Sure.
It's just, I think like right up front, we should just say there is possible to talk about the miraculous or the miracles and it not mean intervention that breaks all the rules or everything's a miracle,
man.
But you tell me which one of those is more annoying.
It depends on the day.
It depends. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think the framing of it with a tragedy and a miraculous event that is both a blessing. He gets to be with his family.
And I did think what was interesting is the unwillingness of the guy Alcide to actually name what happened to him. That I thought was quite honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because on the one hand, it's like, wow, that's kind of an insane thing to happen to you and to survive from. I had a friend who, back in the early days of hang gliding, sort of fell out of the sky and fell like 500 or 600 feet and like landed in a field and just sort of bruised.
As you do,
and sort of just bruised his leg. You know what I mean? Like, how does that happen? You know? Yeah, I don't know why I told you that story.
Well, one time.
That's all I have to say about it.
Well, if you contrast him with the doctor at the end who God eventually told him to go to the hospital.
Yeah, see, that's where those are the
Tom's his name.
Those are the stories where you lose me a little bit. You know, I didn't seek any medical help. Everybody prayed for me. And then God, who I'd been in conversation with, said, maybe you should go get some chemo now. But it wasn't the chemo because chemo doesn't cure things. Well, I guess there's an element of truth in that. I mean, I don't think
I think we're officially supporting people thinking God wants them to get treatment for cancer.
Yeah, I'm for that.
If you were wondering whether or not God desires you to, I would like you to know that Barry was told by God to tell you it's okay to trust the doctor.
Yeah.
But the interesting part, I think, or what he kind of brings out that we don't always think about is like in reflecting back, right?
Yeah.
His story was more nuanced.
Yeah.
So he talked about the doctors, the possibility of God using doctors, about how the people in his faith community and family were caring for him, supporting him, praying for him. And, it's like all of it mattered. And then the researcher who's there hearing the story is kind of pointing out like, yeah, like when you know you're being cared for and supported and prayed for and stuff, it actually helps you recover better.
Yeah.
Like human beings. So that type of scientific data is something that shows up regularly.
Sure.
We didn't get it verified with his frontal lobe this time.
No. Which, you know, if they blended all these episodes into one big episode, that would be interesting.
It does your frontal lobe glow when other people are praying for you.
Yeah, not just about being happy or not, but
yeah,
see, that's a new research project that perhaps we can, now that we're finished with this show, maybe now we can devote our time to that.
Woo. Well, next week you'll see the podcast has been renamed Lobecast.
Lobecast, yeah. It's the frontal lobe.
The podcast dedicated to lobing. Can you lobe your faith?
Lobing through life. But it's faith, hope, and lobe.
Well, the thing is, there's already a podcast called Faith, Hope, and Lube. So,
Really?
I don't know. That was a joke. Just like a lot of this. So, he does say that much of what we call a miracle starts in the mind.
Yeah.
And I think that the connection of your mind in your experience and the world, like a miracle, once you like compare so many parts of the episode, you start to see that what we call a miracle is very much hermeneutical. And like a miracle is a word used to apply to something to say that this event, whatever its rarity, should be interpreted as having teleological intentions from God.
Yeah.
Like a God was invested in this goal happening.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always require intervention or anything.
No.
But I do think it's important to see that miracle is as much us interpreting the events of our lives as it is
that's a really good point. Actually.
God being in them.
Yeah.
So
That's maybe the most important point you've made this entire series.
Well,
no, seriously, I think that's a really great way of capturing what's going on, because I do think that the belief or non-belief or the proving or the disproving of miracles has a lot to do with your perspective on what it is you think God does or doesn't want for people, because you always hear that, God wants you healed, God wants you well. Obviously, this is what God wants. And on one level, you go, well, duh, accept that. There's also the other issue of all the people that aren't okay. So, on the one hand, you go, of course, if you have a conception of God where God's in charge of everything and God loves everybody, of course he'd want the best for everybody, but life would seem to counter that at times.
Well, and that's actually one of the reasons the trip to the Vatican is so interesting to me.
Yeah.
And why I like the whole, how you become a saint thing.
Yeah.
They may have cuttered it and cut some stuff out because there are other parts to becoming a saint.
Yeah.
Other than the verification of miracles. But, the kind of verification of 2 post-death miracles is part of becoming a saint. But they have a devil's advocate.
Yep. Well, they got rid of that now, though, right? They changed the name.
Which is depressing.
It really is. That would be, in this day and age, especially with Lucifer on NBC, Wednesdays at 10, the devil's advocate, that would be really good.
I would.
Do you know I did music supervision for a film called The Third Miracle that was about a whole encounter with whether or not there were miracles, and it featured Armin Mueller-Stahl playing the devil's advocate from Rome.
No.
Yeah, I did. Back in
See?
the day. Film
Fun facts.
directed by Agnieszka Holland.
Well, that's a name.
Oscar winning. Yeah. Me, mate.
Look, if
Ed Harris was in it, playing a disheveled, skeptical priest.
No way.
What?
Ed Harris playing a disheveled person?
Yeah.
He's never done that before.
I know.
Never done it again
He
either.
went straight from playing Jackson Pollock.
Well, I have no idea what we were going to talk about with the Vatican. Oh, yeah.
Well, that was a Vatican story about the devil's advocate.
Well, the other part about becoming a saint isn't just the miracles. It's also this is the connection, the hermeneutical part.
Right.
When the church has the verification part, the other thing they're doing when you call someone a saint is you are giving an interpretation of the person's life.
Yeah.
Someone becomes a saint not by what they do, but what the church sees being done in them.
Special virtue.
Yeah. So this human being's life and faithfulness becomes a window into understanding the divine.
That was the whole premise of this film that I did the music for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it was a woman who'd actually been married and then apparently left her daughter and went into a convent. And essentially the argument from the devil's advocate was she wasn't the right kind of person to be a representative of either God or a saint.
And
of course she lost because it was a movie with Ed Harris where he was the hero.
And he was very disheveled.
It is very disheveled.
The one of the other things that kind of came up, or at least popped in my head, is how in the episode all the substantive parts are never the things that in pop culture mostly get attached to miracles. We did not talk about parking spots or sports. I was just glad. Well, other than the horse racing back in the day and gambling.
Yeah, that was, there were a couple of side journeys, feng shui and horse racing being 2 of them in this show.
Life is a journey, but there are potholes.
There are potholes on the way. Yeah, no, the diversion at the Colosseum towards horse racing and then actually getting into the whole gambling
and fate.
thing, Yeah, and fate.
Yeah. But, so, what do you think about the Passover in Jerusalem?
It's another Saturday night. Well,
you wish that Morgan read at your Seder?
I do. Well, again, it's that strange shift that happens in the show where it goes from the personal to the sort of corporate.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's not about the particular of a single miraculous moment, but then a miraculous coming into being almost. Mm-hmm. And again, you know, the story is bathed in these tales of impossible events that are interpreted or termed as miracles. You know, the miracle of the Passover and the Exodus and that kind of stuff. And of course, you know, we had the world's first
Israeli female rabbi.
So I think that's why we went there for that. But
in it, you see kind of the way a miracle of the Passover, splitting, closing of the season, all that stuff continues to exist as an identity, as a story for the people. They discuss what it's like to share the stories generation to generation, what they're hoping, the expectations and stuff that are going to be received by the kids. You hear the rabbi say, you know, these stories aren't about history. They're actually about ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. It's one of the more subtle statements in the whole thing.
Yeah.
But that if the miracles existing in community are not about history but ideas, then it is an invitation for those miracles to change the way we understand and receive the world and our history.
Exactly. I think that's very much the case, at least in those kind of corporate miracles like that. The personal miracles probably have a minor role in that, but definitely within the horizon of particular religious ideologies, I think that those miracles become a window. Like, yeah, it affects the way you look at the world. You know, you have this aspect of supernaturalism that's attached to your perception of the divine, and it gives you a way to frame your understanding of how life and how community and how the world really works.
One of the parts that stuck out was that they acknowledge the sidedness of miracles. That in the Seder itself, there's the recognition that God actually shed tears, not just for the Jewish people who were enslaved all this time, but for even the suffering of the Egyptians in the process of their liberation. And that type of refusing to have God be the miracle worker whose commitment to liberation involves demonizing and otherizing and just enjoying the slaughter of these people, I think revisions the way we see divine intervention. A lot of times people think of miracles and divine intervention as like God taking sides and beating the bad people or whatever.
Sure.
And there, in the celebration of a time God clearly took sides with the oppressed, right?
Yeah.
In it, it still points out God's desire is not to actually have to have miraculous interventions where people are hurt.
Yeah.
Like God's desire is for a community where this doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And mourns even the loss of the violator.
The cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I wish there'd been more of those kind of deeper kind of explorations, because it's, you know, to go back to that first story, it's very easy to sensationalize the whole miracle thing, and it can get hokey kind of quickly.
Yes, it can.
Like if you go into a coffee shop and there's a guy flipping coins.
Well, which does happen. And that scene's followed by that kind of very personal question that Morgan frames.
Yeah.
Right? Early in this episode, he talks about near-death experience at 16.
Yeah.
And then he says, what about 1989, where these 3 films come out and he just blows up Hollywood?
Yeah.
Metaphorically, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, was this success chance or miracle? Where did this come from? And then you have I
guess that depends on how you view those movies.
Well, I think he was discussing the box office success.
I think you're right, mate. I think it was about the BO.
You don't like Driving Miss Daisy?
I do, actually. Well, yes, I do. No, I liked all those films.
Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah. But, I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, would you term that miraculous? How would you term that? I mean, let's just face it. The odds of that happening for somebody are quite rare.
I also think, from what I know of Morgan, he's an extremely hard worker. He's obviously a good actor.
Yeah.
There was a lot of his own commitment to get to that point. How many people do you know that succeed if you know them? It was luck.
Yeah.
I don't know any successful person. The more you find out about them, they were working at it forever. That didn't like.
Well, you know, there's a lot of, who's that? What's that guy? Nicholas Nasser Taleb. You know, he has that comment that a lot of people mistake luck for skill, but we seldom mistake skill for luck. And I think there's a tension, you know, that sometimes what we put down to our skillfulness is really a matter of luck. But there's also the fact, and then you could bring in Malcolm Gladwell and have your 10,000 hours of putting your nose to the grindstone and the work. And of course, the reality is though that doesn't pay off for everybody. I mean, if it did, the world would be a very different place.
Yeah.
And
I think practice makes habits.
And habits make.
Well, that's why I practiced a lot. I just never used my pinky correctly when playing guitar, and after it became a habit, it severely limited.
Yeah, well, my pinky's bent, so I can't reach that.
But you can get boogers that no one else can.
Exactly.
And for people listening to a podcast, I'm sure that was exciting to know. But Barry's pinky's twisted.
Yeah.
Is that what you say? It's twisted or
bent?
Bent. He's got a hitchhiker pinky.
Is that right?
You know, like most thumbs do that, but if you can, hitchhiker thumb.
Do you ever see the show, The Invaders?
No.
It was a television show. It was on British television when I was growing up, but they had a bent finger.
Oh, that's how you knew.
So when I was a kid,
they all thought you were an alien.
I was a little worried about that. Just momentarily. I mean, I knew I was an alien, so it really didn't matter. And then David Bowie came along, and he was the alien, so I felt fine.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's always good to feel
Rest in peace.
R.I.P. Davey.
What I find interesting about the card thing, is like sheer arbitrariness is never identified as a miracle.
Yeah.
So I don't get why sheer randomness it should correlate the probability of those cards that mean nothing.
Yeah.
Is the same probability of a miracle.
Yeah, no, that didn't make much sense to me.
It didn't make sense to me.
I mean, utter randomness. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks much of life unfolds in completely random ways. And the older I get, the less inclined I am to believe any sort of real ordering to things. I'm also disinclined to name things too quickly miraculous, because I think there's always a sort of, not always, but there's often a backstory.
Yeah.
Or a set of circumstances, or there are just things beyond our comprehension, because as much as we aspire to know, we don't know everything.
In my problem with naming thing miracles, one of the things I like about the saint process is that junk happens after they're dead. Right? Yeah. Like, oh, this is miraculous. Oh, these are saints. No, but in their life, they didn't outsource responsibility to God intervening.
Yeah.
Saints are saints because they did the hard work of caring for the poor, whatever the person becomes a saint for. When you're like, oh, well, God, this was a miracle. A lot of times that just leads to people, one, not recognizing the work someone put into something, or the language when it's too popular, we miss our responsibility. Like all the world religions do not use the language of miracle to then say you as a human being aren't responsible for caring for your neighbor.
Yeah.
Right? When the solution is a miracle, then we start waiting and looking up or turning inward.
Yeah.
And the beautiful parts of faiths are ones that look out and look down.
Yeah.
And
the challenge is, of course, or at least for me, I shouldn't say of course, the challenge for me is that quite often what is deemed miraculous it's so intensely singular and particular and focused on a person. It'd be a miracle if governments could like stop arguing and put their resources. If a government suddenly said, you know what, we're going to like not put all of our money in military build up anymore. We're actually going to put it in education and take that. I'd go, oh, miracles can happen. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. To me, the tragedy is that we kind of sideline the miraculous to these unaccountable events and experiences attributed to some entity or power beyond ourselves, when the true miracle would be if we could actually accomplish what democracy.
Well, the funny thing is, like, if you were to read the Hebrew scriptures, you could highlight things that count as miracles, but if you just read what God was concerned about, it was not a lot of miracles.
Do you want to give an example of that to the listener, Trip?
Like Elijah, and you got some wet wood and it gets caught on fire.
Right.
But that entire scene,
right?
Like, the point was idolatry,
right?
Or you get like prophets show up and you get crazy visions, or they do some junk. What are the prophets talking about? Hey, why don't you not charge interest on debt to homeless people during the Sabbath?
Yeah.
Like, it's the equivalent of like ancient Hebrew payday loans.
And I guess in some ways, in the ancient world, the miraculous was perhaps more tied to communal experiences. So even Jesus in the New Testament, quite often those miraculous stories have some ramification to a person's role in society. The woman with the issue of blood, or the dead guy, or the apparently dead guy on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and the Good Samaritan. You know what I mean? Well, that's maybe not a miraculous story, but you know what I mean? The guy.
No, wait, I actually would just
pool of Bethsaida.
Does it count as a miracle when someone breaks everything their identity culturally is supposed to do to care for the other?
Yeah, you think so?
Like, and maybe everything's not a miracle, but that could count.
Well, it's that would be a terminology, wouldn't it? It'd be how would you and I, term what would constitute a miracle. But my point was, you have those stories. They all have a larger social dynamic to them. So the woman with the issue of blood, she's been isolated. She's been marginalized because of an internal perception of purity and cleanliness. The cripple by the pool, it's competition. The first one in the water gets healed because this myth has grown up that if the waters rumble, if they stir somebody, and then along comes Jesus and just sort of heals the guy that can't get in first. There's a statement there that has nothing to do with whether or not Jesus performs miracles. It has much more to do with competition within a society and how, if you can get the right people, sure, you can get in the pool first, but what about the people that can't?
Well, like, the two things that makes me think of is, Nathan, one of the students at the Hatchery, has been doing a lot of theology and disability.
Yeah.
And in one of his research papers, he kind of highlighted a number of, kind of philosophers of disability who, when trying to read ancient texts or religious texts, draw a distinction between healing and curing.
Sure.
Because curing, you just like fix the problem, and it could be miraculous, but that for like Jesus' goal was not the curing, it was the healing, it was the bringing the people back into community.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you can have like differentiating the two, I think, enables you to see that healing is often possible without curing. And if you think of all the different times as ministers, you're dealing with people near in end of life stuff. You know the difference between someone that's facing it healed or not.
Yeah,
with the way the relationships work with the family, the peace there, and the same like there are lots of congregations that don't know what to do with people that don't fit.
Yeah,
and so they just make it very clear they're not welcome, and then they exit themselves.
Yeah,
and that is a problem that needs healing. So, like, when we start to focus on kind of these physical manifestations of divine doing something, I think we miss the point. The Gospel of John, ironically, and this isn't ironic at all, it's more Alanis Morissette, who's my favorite person to ever play the Big Other.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. because it was in Dogma,
That's
and I
right.
like Kevin Smith movies.
Me too.
But in the early church, there was a document called the Signs document, at least is what Bultmann and New Testament scholars call it, with the miracles that are in the Gospel of John running around going, you should clearly believe in Jesus. Look at the cool stuff he does.
Right.
And the Gospel of John takes this document, which was supposed to be, he's so awesome, you should believe in him, and then says, no, these miracles should not be even miracles. There's lots of people back in the day doing these things. That's not the point. The miracles serve as signs. It's what's being revealed about reality and God that they function. And so the Gospel of John is saying, please don't think miracles are the big deal. What's being communicated at them? Like that when the kingdom of God happens, it's like a wedding where the wine doesn't run out, even if you've been partying down for 6 days or whatever. So
yeah, it's like a homebrewed podcast. I mean, don't you think that on one level, the sort of desire for the miraculous has a lot to do with the need that some people have, or the desire that some people have to know that there's, even though it might seem arbitrary or capricious, a force at work that can intervene at any given moment and change the game?
I think so. That type of miracle or desire for it, I think, is more connected to our fear of being finite beings and wanting to escape our death or deny it, or and the visit to Chinatown, while as someone who does like Taoism, I would just like to state quite briefly, this is the only appearance of a Taoist in the thing. This astrology chart and life mapping is not normative for all Taoists. Like
it was definitely a tangential Taoist moment, I think.
But everyone can be a feng shui writer. But the part about it at the end that popped up that I think really connects what you're saying is that redefinition of miracle not as intervention but as alignment. And recognizing the interconnectedness of existence. And that when everything is connected, then the reasons for things involve all sorts of relationships that if you're looking up waiting for God to show up, you're unaware of the reasons because you're not even attending to the present and the connections. That, I think, is a helpful reframing, and that I don't like the word miracle. That's really my problem.
I'm getting that sense.
But seeing God's relationship to you, the world, or the divine, or however you want to talk about it, as being more focused on our alignment with reality rather than our denial and wanting to escape from it via intervention, is helpful, which is good, because I was distracted by stars and energy fields at birth, connecting to
the 170 stars around at the time. I mean, that fascination that we have with the stars is quite interesting.
Well, in Hollywood, we like the stars as well.
Well, we can go on a star tour.
I know.
And, they're close to the ground as well. That's amazing.
We could even drive by,
we can drive
by Morgan's house.
We could, and probably like all the other houses in Hollywood, see like a fence, a wall, or a hedge.
Ooh.
I know.
And find out what their water bill is online.
Exactly.
So I think you're right. Like, the issue around miracles is often around control of life, and that's also a question of meaning or hermeneutics, like how you interpret existence. And that is one of the ways you can make sense of the gambling, like there was this gambling was bad because you're being real forward and telling the gods what to do or trying to bet on what the god wants. And then there becomes a whole industry of people back in the day who are the ones who know what the god's going to do. So if you go talk to the ones that know what the god's going to do, then you can not be bad when you gamble with them.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, the way that these things also get conflated, the miraculous, fate, destiny, luck, fortune, you start to see the very nuanced ways that all of this stuff plays out, and the way in which interpreting the events of life can become a lucrative environment. Well, or just an environment where people go, And to me, that's another part of the component of people wanting to, a fascination with knowing the future.
Mm-hmm.
We want to know, so we'll go to someone who can interpret the signs of the gods, and it's like the traveling preachers now, expect a miracle, miracles are going to happen tonight, they like know when they're going to occur, and they can create the environment in which it will happen, rather than the notion that the miraculous seems to occur in a very arbitrary and capricious way, hence the first story.
But what if you're like, your sign above your, like, dive bar is poor decisions are going to be made tonight?
It's probably truer. Probably truer than a sign that was a good decision to be made here tonight.
Lingering regret.
Lingering regret. It's a good name for a bar and an album. In fact, good name for a church, the Church of Lingering Regret. That'd be the first Church of Lingering Regret.
Yeah, I'm sure to take off. I mean,
I think we should.
You know what I get up in the mornings for on Sunday?
Lingering regret.
Yeah.
Close to the truth, mate. Especially on a Sunday morning. Maybe after a Saturday night at your dive bar.
And you're like, oh.
Poor decisions.
I
made lingering regret.
I wanted to start a bar called The Library.
The Library.
so that,
there's one in,
is it called The Library?
It's called the Library Ale House.
Yeah, but Ale House really, unless their credit card receipts just says The Library.
Yeah, that's true.
And you're like, oh, I was at the library. What were you doing? Reading.
Yeah, duh. What do you do? Like, you don't even have to answer, so you don't have to lie. You can just leave it to the other person.
Honey, I can't talk right now. I'm at the library.
Yeah, I'm at the library.
I'll text you when I get out.
Yeah.
I'm at my study, Carol.
Yeah.
What do you make of the fact that in Cairo,
yep,
Egypt, 1285, you actually have, this is one of the times in the series you see that, Islam is, figured some things out before everyone else did.
Away.
Yeah, that they combined both attending to the person's, their spiritual side and the medicine at the same time. Like, if at 1285 you're creating medical places,
sure,
giving full dignity to the whole person.
Yeah.
Like that picture of the relationship of religion and science, or medicine and miracles.
Well, it's that thing that, Jack Caputo says, technology repeats theology. That, you think about it, we talk about, the miraculous virgin birth. And now it's possible to have a virgin birth because you can do artificial insemination. So technological advancements allow for the repetition of theological ideas on an entirely different level. But I do think that sort of collapsing of the world, so you have that first hospital. I remember I was, I have a little fascination with obscure magazines, and I really love Lapham's. Lapham's Quarterly. Lewis Lapham. Anyway,
I do not.
There was a really interesting article in there recently about St. Anthony, and this illness, St. Anthony's fire, which was this kind of medieval condition, and actually led to some of the first hospitals being created where they attended to this kind of infection that was all around, the collapsing of kind of spiritual ideas, physical realities. So yeah, I don't know. So I thought that was interesting, that the hospital. And it was kind of funny, it's like you not funny, but you're outside and it's bright sunlight, and he goes, yes, and you come into the dark. It's the reverse of a hospital today. You go into the door of the hospital and it's dark, you can barely see, and it's all suddenly quiet. And then you think about when you go into a hospital today, it's like brighter than outside. It's brighter than Vegas, and it's noisy. And, the last place that you want to be to get, rest. Like if you're sick, probably once the crisis is over, to get out of the hospital is probably a good thing, because they wake you up at like 5 a.m, to do one of those. Bless you.
Yowzers.
Yowzers.
All right. So our last stop was in India.
Yeah, it was. But we weren't Buddhist because, it all begins and ends there. And we were under the tree. We were under the tree with Gautama, which is amazing.
It was a British monk.
It was a British monk. Yeah. I think he was British anyway. Had a slightly obscured accent, but yeah, I'm thinking probably Camden.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah, that was an interest, and again, another one of those moments where you sort of come face to face with the larger idea of the miraculous and how it plays out. But again, it sort of went off into this whole thing about, enlightenment and the mind, the role of the mind in all of this, mind over matter and that kind of thing. And I'm not sure that did they really answer the whole notion of miracles for you in that sense?
Well, he said that one of the lines, our Camden monk said was, the mind has the power to do miracles.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, really?
Yeah.
And then as he describes it, about the Buddha, leaving this opulence where you only had beautiful things around and spend 6 years going around, right? Looking for the cause of suffering.
Yeah.
And then he sits under a tree and finds it.
In 24 hours.
I find that to be a real helpful way to see the difference between Eastern and Western understandings of the miraculous or the question around suffering, because Western religions would never sit under a tree to fix suffering and seek miracles. It's much more of an active thing, a communal thing.
Sure.
And in the way he did we would deal with it like a doctor. Oh, you're sick. You're suffering. Here's the cause. The cause is attachment, right? And he does this diagnosis type thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I find when you turn something he ends up turning the notion of miracle into, it's the transformation of the human mind.
Yeah.
I mean, that is internalizing something that a miracle is just taking the word and having it mean something different.
Sure.
So if one sense miracle for some is divine intervention, for others, it's a way of making meaning out of an event and saying, God was involved. But then to say the real miracle is a transformation of the human mind or the human heart or whatever, I feel like that ending there helps us realize just how complicated and contested the word miracle is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about this program in its kind of attempt to answer this question from a number of places, it sort of leaves a lot of things unanswered or are actually multi-answered. So you get kind of pluralistic responses, which I'm sure some people are not happy with because they've got an investment in a particular interpretation. But if you watch this show, and you dig over the surface veneer of sameness, what you wind up with is an awareness of intense particularity and how complex it is to even take a single notion like miracle and come up with a definitive universal response to what that is. You can't even do it within the horizon of a particular religious ideology. So even within,
I was about to say,
even within the horizon of Christianity, you probably got
a million answers.
A million answers to the. But we presume that there's an answer to this thing, and we tend to defend our particular position on it. I do believe in miracles. I don't believe in miracles. Miracles of this, miracles of that. This is miraculous. That's miraculous.
I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of the story of God versus the dictionary or the encyclopedia of God, right?
Encyclopedia. Yeah.
Where, hey, I'm going to tell you the answer to
Although
this.
I think there seems to me there's an attempt to sort of universalize the story when really, as the show has gone on, I think if you sort of watch it and pay attention, beneath that universalizing is very clear particularities. There are immense differences in all of these religions in how they interpret.
Well, like in this episode, the miracle There's ones where miracles are referent to something about God.
Yeah.
Where miracles are referent to something about chance.
Yep.
Or probability. And miracles reference to something the mind does.
Yeah.
Which is internal. Those are all, and each of those constellations has tons of different answers to it.
Yeah. It's quite remarkable. So
one of the things I was wondering, and we talked about this, I think, in another episode, but how, at the end, when he's like, oh, you know, when Morgan's doing the like closing thing, and he talks about some say God and mind or whatever. But miracles, he said, give hope and drive us to create reality out of possibility.
Yeah.
One of the things I think miracle functions as culturally, and this is, I'm just going to see what you think about it, is we use the word miracle and it could be connected to all those different things. But in one sense, it is a cultural critique of Enlightenment reductionism.
Sure.
That we say the word miracle and insist on it. And when we, whatever narrative we attach to it, but what we're wanting to do culturally when we focus on it, and more people believe in miracles than climate change. So, part of it is like a rejection of the world and its reality being reduced to just efficient causation. Mm-hmm. And now Catholics, obviously there's multiple causations and Aquinas and all that kind of stuff. And you can point to bigger ones. Yeah. But I think the word miracle in all those places, like, no, something more is going on than just basic billiard balls hitting each other, cause and effect.
Yeah. I think you're right. And what's remarkable to me is that while some people would be very, very reluctant to attribute the miraculous to any sense of the sacred, to God or to the divine, they're quite willing to name events that occur in life as miraculous, you know. So, and you know, you could argue, well, it's just using the word in a new way, and what they really mean is fortunate. But we pick the word, we say miraculous, you know, and we say that was miraculous. So we still have the vestiges of that notion, in spite of our kind of Enlightenment rationality. Even the most enlightened or Enlightenment-driven person, I think, would invoke the miraculous at certain edges of their life. It just depends what those edges are, you know. So for some people that translates immediately into a divine human encounter. You know, I mean, I'm more inclined to live in the Nick Cave school of, I don't believe in an interventionist God kind of world. But that doesn't mean I necessarily am willing to subscribe to the universe, the billiard ball, you know, click, because as you know, the more shots that occur on a billiard table, the more unpredictable the future becomes. So you can make predictions in the beginning of a number of trajectories, but once you get a little bit beyond that, everything's up for grabs. Mm-hmm. You know, it becomes much more random and unpredictable. And maybe that's what the miraculous is. It's how we just name what's unpredictable about life. Man, I just went all like, you know.
Maybe.
I was just trying to create some reality out of possibility right there.
There you were.
Which, you know, I balk at those statements sometimes. They just seem so like, yeah, that's on the side of Cafe Gratitude. One of our sponsors. No. Do you know what I mean, though? There's a, you know,
you're feeling very disgruntled and disheveled currently.
Well, no, I'm just British.
I know.
It's like, do you ever read that book, about Oprah by Catherine Lofton? It's fantastic.
No, you mentioned it 2 episodes ago.
Oh, I did. Did I talk about
yes.
that? Yeah. The American astonishment at what can be.
Uh-huh.
I think again.
No. It was like Oprah.
Yeah.
The Gospel According to Oprah or something like that.
Well, in there, she talks about Oprah as being this kind of metaphor for, America. She calls it the American astonishment at what can be. Mm-hmm. And I think that plays out a lot of, at least culturally in the West with what we see as the miraculous. It's like, wow, you know, we have this, wonderment, potential and possibility. And when things occur that we didn't expect, but we hoped would happen, You know, it's miraculous.
Like you
Sorry,
find,
I didn't mean to mention the book twice, Trip. Squeeze me.
No, you were asking if I read it. I was like, no, I added it to my list like a week or two ago.
Yeah, and you haven't read it?
No, I have not.
Well, get together.
I'm not allowed to read new books till the dissertation's done.
Oh. So what for another 5 years? Trip. When are you going to be done with your dissertation, Trip? When can we call you Dr. Fuller? Come on.
Wow. And now you're asking, I just.
Because then you'd be the Reverend Dr. Fuller.
Hell yeah.
Come on now.
But I really just want to go by Trip. But there's going to be a week, Barry. 1 week.
Be a miracle.
1 week, the moment I'm done. Well, for 1 week, I'm going to have everyone call me Dr. T.
Dr. T. Dr. F. Dr. TF.
Maybe for that week, I'll use my full name.
Oh.
George Hiram Fuller III.
Whoa.
Or what about Dr. G.H. Fuller III?
Yeah, I feel that. That would be miraculous.
It would?
Yeah.
Well, I thought there's no better way to end this podcast, Barry, than for you to look under your seat and get keys to a new car.
You got a car. You got a car. That's a miracle. My lease is up.
And then you find out you have to pay for the taxes.
Yeah. That's not so miraculous.
No.
Be a miracle if I could afford to pay for the taxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've come to the end, really, of the story of Godcast. 6 episodes of bliss.
But don't worry. Because we're going to keep doing podcasts together.
Right. But they won't necessarily be the story of Godcasts.
No, but I want to call it God-ish.
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 God-ish. Yeah, that's good.
Because how many topics can you fit in God-ish?
Yeah, so many.
I know.
Yeah.
But and then you can have an episode like, here's a God-ish take on.
A God-ish take on.
So whatever the topic is, you're just like, ooh, we can talk about it religiously.
Yeah.
Like God-ish sports.
God-ish sports.
In this episode, Barry explains why football is interesting and Trib insists is boring. Goddishly.
And Barry'd have to work really hard to do that because he doesn't know that much about it. He'd have to call his brother.
In this episode, Trib and Barry talk to Barry's brother.
Oh, dear. Well, so we come stuttering to a halt.
Goddish. I don't know. We might have maybe.
But at least this episode was redeemed by the presence of the man himself.
I know.
Morgan Freeman.
I know.
Lurking in the early part of the cast.
Yep.
Miraculous.
All right. Everyone remember, good thoughts, good deeds.
Reality into possibility, out of possibility.
Mm-hmm. Waves and energy fields.
Hey, birds don't fly.
They ride.
They're flown.
They flow their feng shuis.
Fish don't swim. They're swum.
They're swum.
That's like Dr. Zeus right there.
Yeah. Remember, cutter the clutter.
Get cuttered. He's going to hate us. You know that, right?
What?
He's going to hate us for that. Only because we love him.
Well, I love everyone.
Just closing thoughts, Trip?
My closing thoughts?
Yeah.
No.
We should go out with the song we came in on, Hot Chocolate, because everybody should have some now and go to bed. I believe in miracles, you sexy thing.
Sexy thing, yeah.
Bye, Trip.
You sexy thing, you. I believe in miracles. Since you came along, you sexy thing.